Want to learn something? Because this time out, on a channel called Rutgers Church, a theologian is going to provide some disquieting news for the religious, and I've got some questions in response. Because following these ideas to their logical conclusion, that doesn't seem to be in the Christian playbook, does it? So, let's go take a look. I've been trying here and there to bring up ideas that you might not really see on YouTube very often, just to get people to think. It doesn't usually work, especially when you're talking to the religious, but it's a nice change of pace. This time, we're going to go watch a video by a Presbyterian theologian who's going to tell you something shocking about the Bible. Well, it's not shocking to us because we actually understand the Bible a whole lot better than the religious do, but it's going to raise some questions that I don't think the religious really want to consider. Because what else is new, right? Now, I love the music here. This is like something that ought to scare people, and really, that's not the case. I mean, I get that you might not like the facts about the Bible, especially if you accept the Bible uncritically, but the whole scary music thing is kind of dumb. Reality is what reality is, and adults, rational, critical thinking adults, they ought to be able to accept reality no matter what it happens to be. Can we just try that, just once? That would sure be nice.
Dear friends, about half of the writings associated in the Bible with Apostle Paul are in fact pseudo-epigrapha.
Yeah, so? I mean, that's really nothing new. We've known that for a very, very long time. The ones that were thought to be written by the same author, those include Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, 1st Thessalonians, Galatians, Philippians, and Philemon. Now, I say it like that because we can't actually prove that they were ever written by somebody actually named Paul or Saul, depending on which way you want to go. They just bear the marks that they were all written probably by the same person, and that's really all that we can say. The ones that weren't, or at least that there are really good arguments that they weren't, are Hebrews, Timothy, Titus, Ephesians, and 2nd Thessalonians. There's also good reason to think that there are parts of 1 Corinthians, particularly the part about women not being allowed to speak in church, that are almost certainly a later Christian addition, because it completely disrupts the narrative, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. I don't know if he's going to get to any of that later on, but I just figured I'd beat him to the punch.
That is a scholarly and polite way of saying that they are forgeries.
Well, not really. Mostly, they were just church tradition that said that these were written by Paul, just like it's been church tradition that Matthew was written by Matthew, Mark was written by Mark, etc., etc. Now, we know that that's not actually the case. It's just that higher textual criticism has been catching up on the wishful thinking that the church has been carrying around all along. Now, you might think that I'm being overly charitable here, but I'm not. I promise.
Those writings, those letters, only pretend to be written by Paul, but they are not. And I vividly remember the 4th year in my seminary in Prague, and we were reading the letter to Colossians in Greek. Right away, the first chapter is just 6 Greek sentences. Very, very long and convoluted, complex sentences.
And this is one of the many reasons that we know that these were not written by the same person. Now, I'm sorry if I'm jumping the gun here. He might actually get to this, but we can compare the language structure of the different writings to see if they share commonalities. People write in a certain way. In fact, it's really, really difficult to avoid writing that way unless you're purposely making an attempt not to. And this is also why we know, for example, that the part that Christians love to put forward on Josephus' claims about Jesus in Jewish antiquities, that's how we know it wasn't written by him. The language just doesn't match up. And like in 1 Corinthians, it completely spoils the flow of the passage. If we remove it entirely, it flows properly. It makes proper sense. It sounds right. It was clearly an early Christian attempt at forgery, and therefore Josephus gives us no extra biblical evidence for the existence of Jesus. But so far, I think this guy is pretty much on the mark, and that's actually a surprise. Are we going to get anything to disagree with? I don't know. Let's keep watching.
Each sentence is a paragraph long, and one has about 160 words. Any normal modern attempt for translation had to divide those 6 sentences in smaller chunks, sometimes up to something like 50. That language is simply not from Paul.
Nope, he's got that one right too. But this guy is a theologian. And where we tend to see problems with theologians and apologists and people like that is that they tend to need to find a way to justify maintaining their belief even after they've presented the evidence against it. It's not just an evaluation of the facts. It's a bald rationalization for why the facts don't actually matter and you ought to believe anyhow. Because if you just look at the facts, if you look at nothing but the facts, then there's no good reason to believe in Christianity at all, and this guy wouldn't be billing himself as a theologian on a church channel. So I think something is going to go pretty wrong pretty quick. I mean, that's just my take on it, but yeah, I think it's pretty obvious.
No way. Paul's own sentences are usually half as long, pointed, argumentative, and with a drive. And his grammar and syntax were also different. These are all features of language which do not change easily in letters.
So let me ask you this, because the only thing that Paul supposedly had going for him was that he had a drug trip on the way to Damascus, and he at least claimed to have had a direct experience with the spiritual Christ. He never once said that he had ever seen the real one, only the spiritual one. Now, I don't believe any of that ever happened because there's no evidence for any of that, but that's the claim upon which all of Paul's validity supposedly rests. It's also an article of blind faith, and, take that as you will. So if we're going to throw out Paul's authorship of these books, and if we're going to be honest, we have to, we also have to throw out everything that they said as valid. Now, are Christians willing to do that? Of course not, because this isn't about the scholarship, it's about their fifis. It's about getting that emotional high by blindly believing the things that make you happy, not having to actually justify any of this stuff in objective reality. It's why having any kind of rational discussion with these people is so difficult. We can't just point out the facts. We can't just expect them to pay any attention. We can't argue that half of the supposed Pauline writings are now completely unjustified because they just don't care. They don't give a damn because they just want to be happy. They want to believe it whether it's true or not. And whether they like that or not, it's kind of a problem.
You can perhaps change your style for artistic reasons, but it would be strange or even counterproductive to change it in your personal letter. Of course, this suspicion of biblical forgeries is nothing new. There were ancient doubts about some of them, and from the middle of or the second half of the 18th century, there started to be accumulated, solidly founded, and well-argued theories about it.
Yet, that hasn't changed the minds of the religious, has it? But we come back around to this guy, and I have to ask that question. If he acknowledges that there are problems with the Bible, and there certainly are, there's no denying that, then why in the world would he still believe it? Why would he continue to profess faith, presumably, based on a book that he acknowledges is at least partially wrong? And this is really even worse when you think about it. We've learned more and more about the actual authorship of the Bible over the years, which is leading some people to reevaluate the church traditions. But the simple fact is, we've never actually established any of it to begin with, at least the important parts, from a Christian perspective. We can't even prove that Jesus existed. We sure can't prove that there is a God. So how can you just pick and choose the parts that you want to take on faith and the parts that you actually want to rationally examine and decide which one you want to believe in the end? And that makes absolutely no sense to me, but this is religion, and like it or not, religion makes absolutely no sense.
But it is one way to hear or read about it, and it is something different if you can personally experience it firsthand. And so, together with majority of biblical scholars, I'm now certain that Colossians, Ephesians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 and 2 Timothy, and Titus, and of course Hebrews, were not written by Apostle Paul.
And that sounds pretty much like the same list that I gave before. I mean, I'm not going to go back and check, but it sounds pretty accurate to me. So, if it wasn't written by Paul, if there ever was a Paul in the first place, then why keep them in the Bible at all? They weren't written by anyone with any kind of demonstrable authority, although, honestly, there are no demonstrable authorities for absolutely any of it. But why haven't we been flushing them out of the newly printed Bibles entirely? Because the religious just don't care. If we found out tomorrow that every single book in the Bible, Old and New Testament, that they were all complete forgeries, to use his language, if we found out that people in the past had all gotten together and it was all a giant practical joke and it was all made up, that wouldn't change the mind of any of the theists. Not one bit. And this is why I wonder why they engage in any kind of scholarship at all. What's the point? If you don't care if you ever get to the truth, after all, they're just going to rationalize their way around reality and get back to their comforting faith, then who cares about any of it? Why do we care if any of it stands up to any kind of rational scrutiny? It's all a complete waste of time. Just like Christianity.
There are pious forgeries. And that is something you might not know about the Bible. And quite likely, you haven't heard about it in a church. Biblical forgeries will be our theme next Sunday. This Sunday will be about genuine Pauline letters. But even there, they have interesting and profound surprises for us.
Oh, good. They're not true either. Now, that's not exactly a surprise. If you just jettison faith and look at things critically, I find no way whatsoever that you can ever condone Christianity at all. And that goes for all religions if you think about it, because they're all doing the exact same thing. So why is this? If we found out tomorrow that, say, evolution was a complete sham, all the evidence had been fabricated for more than 100 years, and the scientific establishment has been lying to us all this time, which, yes, a lot of religious people would actually believe that, would you continue to believe that it was true? Because I know I wouldn't. Instantly, it would be, well, that's wrong, throw it away. But the religious, they don't work that way because they just don't care. And while I'm absolutely fine with the way that this particular video went, he didn't go off into the weeds or anything, he was actually pretty good, I've got no doubt that when he gets into the pulpit on Sunday morning, whatever is happening, he's not going to be teaching, this stuff is wrong and you shouldn't believe it. No, I'm pretty sure it's going to be loaded with excuses for why the facts really don't matter and you should believe it anyhow. And that's kind of the way religion operates, and it always has. Maybe that's something that people need to start reevaluating. They're not going to because they don't want to, but maybe they should. The Bible, whether anybody likes it or not, is complete bunk. It can't be rationally justified one bit, at least all the supernatural magic parts that people really believe in. And that's why the religious don't use rationality. They use rationalizations. They desperately want it to be true, so they look for reasons to validate why they can believe that it's true. They know where they want to go, and they just twist and turn things so that they can get there. Why is that a worthwhile way to look at the world? I don't know. You tell me.
Bum